Honorable Angelina Motshekga. A very welcome to you, Ma. We are also joined by members of the Executive Council, the heads of department from all our 9 provinces, national, provincial, and district officials. We further have in our presence the teacher unions, chief executive officers, CEOs of the entities in basic education, higher education institutions, and a range of stakeholders and partners who share our interest and goal of providing a quality basic education to all our children, especially during this trying time and difficult time our country is facing in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. A very special welcome to our local and international plenary speakers with expertise in their respective fields, joining us here for the Lekgotla to share their knowledge and experience. I'm sure that your inputs and presentations will enrich discussions during the course of the next few days of our Lekgotla. As I mentioned earlier on, we will be doing this a bit differently. This year, by having the Lekgotla on a virtual platform, which is something that has never happened before. This year, the Lekgotla is hosted as a private Microsoft Team live event, whereby only presenters and invitees will have admission rights to the Lekgotla. The link sent to delegates after they register is not transferable, please. Documents were distributed to you prior to the Lekgotla, and these include the Basic Education Sector Lekgotla program, the guidelines for presenters, chairpersons, facilitators, and delegates, which provide advice that will help us have a successful virtual Lekgotla. We also submitted 2 reports, the one on time to teach, teacher attendance, and time on task in Eastern and Southern Africa, and COVID-19 and the challenges of curriculum actions in African Portuguese-speaking countries. Documents of the Lekgotla, including all presentations, are available to the link of the department. Participants are requested to note that only presenters will be able to talk and that attendees will be able to engage via a chat facility. A moderator has been assigned to each session to receive the chat messages from participants. Moderators appointed are officials who are faith with the contents of the particular session. So they will either respond to the message, pass the message to the chairperson directly, or publish the message on the chat facility. Following the presentation, presenters will take questions and engage with the attendees through the live chat. I further wish to inform all delegates of the House rules, which should be adhered to at all times. All participants to participate actively in the deliberations in the Lekgotla and stay for the duration of the Lekgotla. Provide contributions based on their experience and knowledge in the specified field. Please observe the starting time and duration of the break and return punctually, and videos and microphones to be off during the discussions. Delegates are advised to remain connected throughout the day, but not only connected, but also be in the meeting throughout the day where possible. More tips are available in the guidelines. Let me take this opportunity to introduce to you a woman who changed the direction of education, basic education in South Africa she moved it to a greater height. Want to introduce to you and request you to join me as we receive the Minister of Basic Education, Honorable Angelina Motshekga. Over to you, Minister. Minister Motshekga, over to you, ma. I trusted this platform and I still trust it.
South Africa, South Africa. No kanon sa gim, deep kanon si, body comes on would give, sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our
All right, we do apologize for that. It's just frozen, that picture. So emphasis, we're told, is going to be put on the fourth industrial revolution and the need to ensure that learners have the best possible chance at succeeding in a fast-changing global environment, isn't it? We're expecting President Cyil Ramaphosa to address this 2021 virtual Basic Education Lekgotla. So we will keep a close eye on that. When we get that link up and running, we'll get those proceedings to you live. Let's take a quick
Good morning, everyone. We seem to be having a challenge connecting the minister. Gail, if you could continue while we try and get the minister online, we'll continue. Thank you.
We are still waiting for Minister Angelina Motshekga to be connected to do the official welcoming address of this meeting, this Lekgotla. Minister, we're waiting for you for the opening, or the president will be doing the opening address. Minister will be doing the remarks, opening remarks in this Lekgotla. So we really appreciate this platform. It makes us to be a bit proactive and to show innovation. But I know that the connectivity might not be our challenge necessarily. But now we are excelling in these virtual meetings, which I believe that even beyond COVID-19, will continue in some of our meetings in this fashion, which is a very reliable, and you can hold a meeting wherever you are. So we really, really appreciate. We also appreciate the presence of our president that shows that indeed education is an apex priority of the country, because through education, we are able to fight the triple challenge of inequality, unemployment, and poverty. So if the president gives education a priority, even coming to our meetings, it gives us hope that we'll be able to drive the future of South Africa to a right direction. So I'm requesting that please let's make sure that the minister is connected to do the opening remarks. Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, can we make sure that our gadgets are charged at all times? Because we don't want, when we call a presenter and find that the gadget gets cut during the course of the meeting. And during comfort breaks, let's take some steps, walk around to allow the flow of blood in our body. Like I indicated earlier on, let's stay connected. And when your mic is on, please switch off your cell phone or put it on a silent mode, not a mode that a vibration that will all be distracted by the vibration. And the last request, let's stay for the duration of the meeting, especially those in the sector. I know the sector has its own stakeholders, and the stakeholders are part of the sector. We all stay throughout, unless we have been invited just to come and make a presentation and take questions, then you can be released. We're still waiting for Minister Motshekga to come in. I know the president is ready. I want to be advised by those that are controlling this, if they are unable to connect the minister. And what is happening now, please, is a call for all of us that let's try by all means to stay where there is sufficient connectivity, so that we don't experience these glitches, because they disturb the meeting. if they are unable to connect the ministers.
DM, the minister is having some huge technical challenges. We have tried to get hold of her. The presidency is live and waiting for us. Maybe if you can introduce the president and then we can continue whilst we try and get hold of the minister. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw the president. I believe that will allow minister to get the right space that will make her to be part of this meeting. This is the minister's meeting, it's minister's Basic Education Lekgotla. But on behalf of Minister Angelina Motshekga, I would like you to join me as we welcome the President of the Republic of South Africa to the podium. I know that President, yes, we might say he doesn't need introductions, but sometimes he does. We know the President of the Republic of South Africa, where he started his life as a leader of the society, personally in his personal capacity, and the movement together. And this is the person that South Africans trusted to lead the country. Mr. President, we are honored to have you today in the basic education sector, Lekgotla. May I take this opportunity and welcome you to the podium, Mr. President. Say.
Thank you, Professor. I believe the Minister and technical those who are in the provincial legislation, leaders of various political, trade union and civil society foundations, and those who are in attendance. Thank you all who are attending this basic education sector. I always take time to attend this important
All right, as you can hear, we're having some terrible audio issues with that. We will try and fix it up. I'm not sure if it's from our side or their side. It's probably that side, so we're going to try and fix it up and get you that address from the president. But we are listening to his address.
We're grateful for the entire thanks to their resilience, their tenacity, and persistence that we were able to salvage the academic year. Our educators, like our health professionals, gave of their best this past year. They displayed the utmost professionalism in going to teach our learners despite the risks. We're deeply saddened by the educators who we have lost to COVID-19. But we pay tribute to them and once again extend the sympathies of the entire nation to their families, their friends, and their colleagues. As we reflect on the past year, with all its hardship and difficulties, Our greatest congratulations go to our matriculants. They are the ones who have done well, and we want to congratulate them and their families because they really make our nation proud. I'd like to encourage those who did not make it this year to take advantage of the opportunities provided through the Second Chance program. Do not see this as a failure, but as a setback from which you can learn and from which you can recover. The future of our country is in the hands of our young people. If we are to meet our developmental goals, we need to provide young people with quality education that prepares them not just for the challenges of the present, but also for the opportunities of the future. This year's Lekgotla is about equipping learners with knowledge and skills for an ever-changing world. Not only must we adapt to new ways of learning, but our own curricula has to respond to the changes in the world of work. In addition to having the right content, technologies, and safe learning environment, we must ensure that our young people are grounded in the ethos of learning, but also of industry. The coronavirus pandemic has highlighted the digital divide in society, particularly with regards to the adoption of technologies for learning and teaching. It underscores the need to intensify efforts to ensure connectivity and equitable access to data. This calls for stronger public-private partnerships to ensure that we mobilize the necessary resources to help our learners. One of the key focus areas of the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan that our country is embarked on is to boost education and skills development. Our schools must teach the skills that will be able to support the growth of the economy and enable financial inclusion. We don't want an economic recovery that only benefits some people. We want it to benefit all. The higher education sector recently raised concerns about the large numbers of learners in subjects for which there is a lot of demand in the economy. This challenge begins in the early years. Firstly, with subject choices that limit future opportunities for learners, and secondly, with the poor performance of learners in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields. Equipping learners with knowledge and skills for a changing world necessitates a relook at these critical subjects, areas, and the curriculum in general. As we review the matric results, one of the prominent indicators of quality is how the country is doing in these STEM subjects. If we are to seize the opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution, our education system must be reoriented towards its development in our country. Studies show that the country is lagging behind in the information technology skills that are needed for the digital revolution that we must embark upon, because it is here and it is happening now. It will not be possible for us to build a skilled economy as envisaged in the National Development Plan if we do not pay attention to subject areas at basic education level. Even as the pandemic delayed the process last year, the Department of Basic Education is making headway on the national rollout of coding and robotics. This I am very pleased about. The draft coding and robotics curriculum has been submitted to Umalusi for evaluation and quality assurance, and the draft curriculum will soon be gazetted. This issue of coding is really important. During this year, 200 schools will be piloting the draft curriculum from grades R to 3, and 1,000 schools will be piloting the grades 7 curriculum. However, focus on these new areas should not come at the expense of basic skills such as reading for comprehension. We also have to continue to invest in early childhood development as the foundation for cognitive development and create policy certainty where it is lacking. Knowledge and skills for a changing world also include emotional stability, intelligence, and an environment where learners can be safe from abuse. We need to build stronger social compacts that put learners and their education first. And this means social compacts with the key stakeholders in our sector, with our trade unions, the parents, with various service providers, of course with educators, and those who continue to work to improve the education of our children. The past year has been extremely difficult, but the people of this great country have shown great resilience and resolve. The year ahead will also be challenging, but we now have a clear path to recovery. And with our focus on developing the skills that children need for a changing world, we also have a clear path towards a better future. I'd like to wish you well as you deliberate in this Lekgotla, and whatever contributions, and discussions, debates, and even arguments that you will have, just keep on remembering that you are preparing the future of our country. Treat it as correctly as we would like it to be treated. Have a wonderful Lekgotla, and thank you very much for having me in your company. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. We really appreciate your coming to open our Lekgotla, to give us the marching orders. And we promise you, President, we are going to deliberate objectively and shape the education of our country to the best interest of the people of South Africa and your interest too, Mr. President. We are so honored to have you today. And now I will call Dr. Palio. I don't know whether the President would want to hear the analysis of the grade 12 results. I want to call Dr. Palio to give us the analysis of the 2020 class of grade 12, the analysis of the grade 12 results. Mr. President, in the event you leave, thank you so much. We really appreciate. Dr. Palio, over to you.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. I just want to make sure that the sound is clear, Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you, Dr. Palio. You can continue.
Thank you very much. His Excellency, the President, the Honorable Minister of Basic Education, our Deputy Minister of Basic Education, MCs present, the DG of Basic Education, heads of department present, the chairperson of Umalusi, the CEO of Umalusi, the leaders of our teacher unions, the leaders of school governing body associations, professional bodies present, other leaders of education that are present, colleagues, good morning. And this is indeed a special privilege for me to present to you the analysis of the 2020 NSC results. But let me commence by indicating that I am indeed placed with a daunting task. Never in my wildest dreams did I think and imagine that I would be expected to make a presentation after the President of the Republic of South Africa has spoken. So I must say, where I am this morning, there are shivers running down my spine, but I'm going to depend on the
Hearing from Dr. Polia, who's supposed to give us some analysis of the 2020 National Senior Certificate results, saying shivers are running down his spine. Didn't think that he'll ever talk after the President of the Republic, and then the connection broke. So
divine intervention to help me with this daunting task of having class of 2020. What is also very important is that for the first time, we looked at making the assessment more reflective of the subject. And this was done by splitting accounting and business studies into 2 papers. So it gives learners a great opportunity in terms of time to be able to demonstrate their competency and their abilities in the subject. We've had the designated list that was abolished, which this means that all subjects can now or will be considered by higher education institutions as part of the entrance to higher education. Moving now to what is very important is let's get to understand the competency level of the class of 2020. Now, various statements have been made thus far. Moving on to the next slide, about the strength of this class of 2020. Now, what we've done, and the next slide will show this, we've compared the performance of the class of 2020 to the previous classes in grade 11 as well as in grade 10. So, in other words, we took this class, which was in grade 12 in 2020, we looked at their performance in grade 11 in 2019 and compared the performance in grade 11 to previous cohorts that were in grade 11. And we did the same in terms of the grade 10 cohort, or this cohort when they were in grade 10, and compared their performance to other cohorts when they were in grade 10. Now, my slides are not moving and I'm not sure why. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the next slide. Now, what we did was, this particular slide compares the performance of this particular class when they were in grade 10 in 2018 and compared their performance to the grade 10 class of 2017. And if you look at this table, you find that across the board, the class of 2020, when they were in grade 10, did better than the cohort or the grade 10 cohort of 2017, except for life sciences. And if you move on to the next slide, we find the same kind of trend in terms of the next slide. You find the same kind of trend where in grade 10, this class was performing better. And if we move on to the next slide, which is now looking at the performance of this cohort when they were in grade 11, moving to the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. We seem to be having a problem with the slide. Okay, that's fine. Okay, now here again, if you compare the performance of this class when they were in grade 11 to the previous cohort in 2018, you find that across the board, their performance is better in grade 11. And if you move on to the next slide, we find the same trend. So this is some kind of an indication that this cohort is a stronger cohort. And therefore, in trying to understand the performance of this particular class, we need to understand that if there was no COVID, we would have certainly seen the best performance coming from this particular class based on their historical trend in terms of the analysis of the performance we've seen. Now, given COVID-19, what did we do in terms of supporting this particular class? We now move on to the next slide, which is the support provided to the class of 2020. Now, we need to commend our provincial departments. Together with the DBE under our Director General and his leadership, that have gone out of the way, as I indicated earlier, to insulate this class, to make sure that even though other classes may be negatively impacted, that this particular class is well supported. And on the next slide, we look at the 6 key areas in terms of DBE support that was provided to this class of 2020. which included the DG's monitoring visit in terms of going personally to each of these centers where there was additional support and to make sure that what was indicated in the plan was in fact being accomplished. There was direct curriculum support activities, teacher development support. ICT played a very important part in terms of dealing with the fact that there could not be face-to-face engagement at classroom level in times when schooling was disrupted. LPSM provision and monitoring of extra weekend and vacation classes. Now that was the DBT support. In terms of support provided by the PEDs, which also was more or less in the same vein. And so there was this double-pronged support coming from DBT as well as the PD. I know the time is against me, so I'm going to try and move a little faster. Now the next slide provides you with a picture of our DG in action at the point where the learning support was taking place. So in summary, I think we can conclude that despite COVID-19, there were innovative measures that were brought to bear to support this class. And while significant efforts have been made to recover the academic year and provide the extraordinary support to the learners, the total impact of the abnormal educational context will remain unknown. And we know that various researchers, together with the department, are looking at exactly what the learning losses are. And I'm sure we'll get closer in terms of our understanding of the learning losses. Now let's move to the class of 2020. Now what is important about the class of 2020 is that they wrote the exam together with candidates that would have written the June exam in May, June 2020. So in total, we have what we're calling a combined examination of over 1 million learners that combine NSC candidates, senior certificate candidates, and also your MEO candidates from 2019. The next slide gives you an indication of the scale of this very large examination that we managed. You have two parts now. We had a total of, previous slide. Okay, yeah. We had 80,000 invigilators that had to accommodate and supervise the over 1 million learners. We had 45,000 different markers from the 9 provinces, and all of this indicates to us that this is indeed a mammoth task, and the fact that it has been accomplished successfully was certainly as a result of divine intervention. The next slide gives us an indication of the numbers that were in full-time enrollment. And here we're looking at the learners that were at school. So I'm not looking at the total of the 1 million learners that wrote. Now it's interesting that in 2016, we had the highest number. That was the year in which we introduced the policy on progression. So a large number of learners were moved into grade 12. And thereafter, our numbers have remained fairly stable. Even though there has been a small drop from 616,000 to 607,000, you will find later that we've had an increase in the number that wrote. So this is giving you an indication of the drop in enrollments from 2019 to 2020. And I think what is important here is to look at the provinces and where there were bigger drops when comparing 2020 enrollment to 2019. Now here comes this very important slide. The next slide. Now the point I made is that there has been a drop in total enrollment. Now enrollment would be the number that registered to write the examination. So in 2019 we had 616,000 candidates registering to write the exam, but finally 607,000 said to write the exam. And this was because of the policy of multiple examination opportunity, where not all learners were compelled, particularly progressed learners, to write all 6 subjects. But now look at the number that wrote when comparing 2019 with 2020. Previous slide. If you can go back onto the previous slide, this is an important point. In 2019, we had 504,000 that wrote the examination. But in 2020, we had 578,000. So in terms of the increase in the number that wrote in 2020, we have 74,000 more learners writing the examination. And the reason for the increased number is due to the fact that there was no policy on multiple examination opportunity. All progress learners that registered for the examination had to write. So even though our enrollments have dropped, the number that actually wrote the exam in 2020 is higher than the number that wrote the examination in 2019. On the next slide, we look at the part-time enrollment very quickly. I know time is against me. And again, there's been a gradual increase in our part-time enrollment, and this indicates that our second chance program has really bearing fruit in terms of attracting part-time candidates, and these are adult candidates. However, in 2020, we've seen this drop from 170,000 part-time candidates to 117,000. Now, I think you and I will understand and what the reasons were. And the reasons were simply due to COVID, a number of learners did not feel fully supported, and therefore they did not enroll to write the examination. Now, on the slide that is already projected on the screen, what is indicated per province is the number that actually went to write. Of the 117,808 learners that entered for this particular examination, 69,000 went to write the exam. So just a little over half of our part-time candidates finally wrote the examination. We'll talk about this performance a little bit later. The next slide gives us the gender breakdown in terms of boys versus girls, and we have more girl learners writing the grade 12 examination than boy learners, and the percentage is 55% to 44%, or 56 to 44. Moving on to the next slide, which is also an important slide, looking at the subject enrollment. I think this is something we monitor on an annual basis to look at the subject shifts. Because we need to make sure that our learners are taking the kind of subject that would prepare them for higher education and the world of work. Now, the rate is an indication, sorry, we stay on that slide, going back to that slide. The rate is an indication that this is where numbers have dropped. But the positive is that in accounting, in business studies, our numbers have increased. Now, for those of you who would recall, in previous years, there's been the steady decline in accounting and business studies. History has been on an upward trajectory, and that is very promising. However, we're still concerned with mathematics and physical science where there are these drops. We can now move on to the next slide, which is also an important slide because it captures for us the number of progress learners. Now, in 2019, 125,000 learners. That number dropped significantly to 70,000. And the drop was a margin of 55,000. And we still need to investigate as to what caused the drop in the number of progress learners. There are a number of reasons that we hope that it's not the gatekeeping of schools, and it's more the application of the policy on progression that is now being clearly and rigidly applied, and that has brought about the reduction in the number of progress learners. Now, moving on to the next slide, we look at the number of learners that are in special education, and our numbers are still very small. And remember, we're not talking about the number of learners in special education, but the number of learners that are SME learners that have written the metric examination. And we had 2,161 of them that entered and 2,058 that wrote. Moving on to the next slide, which is also a very interesting slide that we present on an annual basis. The next slide, which gives us the age analysis. In terms of the age analysis, we look at the grade 12 class, next slide, in terms of the different age categories. And on this slide, we have separated the boys and the girls. Now, the bulk of our learners that are in grade 12 are 18 years of age. There are almost 67% of them that are 18 years of age, and another 44% that are 19 years of age. But what is important here is that if you look at the 18-year-olds, we have more girls than boys. But as soon as you move to the 19-year-olds, we find that there are more boys than girls. And as you go to the older cohort, 20 and 21, we find that the number of boys increases quite significantly. So this is an important point. I think all our efforts in terms of promoting the girl learner are beginning to bear a positive outcome. This is just comparing the age distribution of the 2019 and 2020, and we find that it is more or less the same. But let me move a little bit faster in the interest of time. We also monitor those that have been in correctional services and have been afforded a second opportunity while in correctional services, and we have 133 of them that wrote the examination on a full-time basis. 133 entered, 124 wrote. And also, there is a part-time cohort in prison, and there were 55 of them, and 48 wrote. Looking at social grant enrollment, and I'm sure that our president will be quite impressed that we're monitoring performance of learners that receive social grants. We have what we call active and inactive participants. An active social grant recipient will be one that receives the social grant in his or her grade 12 year. An inactive social grant recipient will be one that would have received the social grant prior to the grade 12 year. Now, the policy is as soon as the learner turns 18, the social grant is terminated. So we have a large number of inactive recipients, and we will look at the performance a little bit later, and you'll find that there is a significant difference between active and inactive social grant recipients. Now let's get to the results. And I think for me, the results in 2020 must be looked at in the context of this class. So continuously remind yourself that this was the class that was held ransom by COVID-19. And if we look at it in that context, you will be overwhelmed by how well this class has performed. Sometimes we need to stop looking at percentages and look at the reality of what the outcomes are. Now, this slide we always want to present because it reminds us as to where we come from. In 1970, President, we only had 43,000 learners attaining the matric certificate. And we have, in fact, jumped or leapfrogged or increased by leaps and bounds to 440,000 in 2020. So that is an increase of almost 10 times. So this indicates to you as to how much the democratic dispensation has contributed to granting learners access to the matric. Now, looking at the 2020 performance, and again, my initial statement, let's understand the context. In 2019, we had an 81.3% pass, overall pass percentage. We celebrated. This year, there's been a slight drop. And for me, this drop is insignificant if one looks at the challenges that confronted this class. In fact, in the words of our president, we expected a bloodbath. But a drop of 5%, statisticians will tell us, is not one that we should be deeply concerned about. Moving on to more specifics regarding the results, and now we're going to look at the provincial performance. Now, I know we should not be comparing provinces simply because provinces also have their own context. But I think it's an interesting way of acknowledging the performance of provinces, and also I think the competitive spirit can, if well controlled, serve to grant provinces some kind of a stimulus to be able to improve not on their position, but to improve on their previous performance. And I think for me, that's a critical element. Now, if you look at 2019 versus 2020, I think we want to acknowledge the performance of the Free State at 85.1%, and our top 3 provinces have kept their rankings. Okay? Now, in terms of our provinces that have not done so well, we understand their contextual challenges. But I must say that despite the fact that there was this drop, and some provinces have dropped by up to 10%, but if you look at the numbers, there's been an increase overall. So there's a lot of positive, Honorable President, in terms of the performance of this class of 2020. Moving on to the next slide, we also do something very interesting in terms of comparing fee-paying schools, fee-paying learners versus no fee-paying or non-fee-paying schools. Now, again, it's just a pity that time is against me, and I'm getting an indicator which says I have 10 minutes left, and I'm just warming up. But we'll see how best we can do what we can do in the remaining time. Now, if you compare, and I want to focus on the no-fee-paying school. These are our quintiles 1, 2, and 3 schools. Now, the province that stands out here is KwaZulu-Natal. If you were to rank provincial performance in terms of no-fee-paying schools, then KwaZulu-Natal will be ranked 3, simply because they're doing a lot in terms of promoting and supporting the no-fee-paying schools. And then you can look at the rank order of the other provinces in terms of no-fee-paying schools. But let's move. Entry passes by qualification type. This is very interesting because here we're looking at quality of passes. And remember, the NDP is about quality in terms of educational performance. We've had 36.4% of our learners attaining admission to bachelor. Now, 36.4% may not appear high. But if you take the 210,000 that now can qualify to admission to bachelor studies and combine that with 150,000 that now attain admission to diploma studies, which is also higher education studies, so that more than 50%, in fact close to 60% of our learners now qualify for admission to university education. So this is for me a significant point and one that we have to harness and continue to improve. Now again, moving on to the next slide, we look at performance in terms of fee status, and I'm not going to spend too much of time. You will have the presentation with you, and you can do the various kinds of your own analysis to compare fee-paying and no-fee-paying schools. So no-fee-paying schools have attained 26% in terms of admission to diploma, and 29, which is almost 30% compared to the 36%, which was the national. So our no-fee-paying schools are not trailing far behind the overall performance of the system. Moving on to the bachelor pass trend, the next slide. This is just giving an indication of how the system has improved in terms of bachelor performance over the last few years. And again, there is this gradual increase and the slight drop, which is 0.5%, which for me is not significant. This tells you about the performance over the years. And again, the vital point that we need to remember, that we have an increase in the number of learners obtaining admission to bachelor studies, which is 24,000 more learners attaining admission to bachelor studies in 2020. The next slide just compares the different provinces, and obviously KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng stand tall. They contribute almost 50% of the admission to bachelor studies. In the next slide, we compare performance across the provinces, and again, Gauteng, Western Cape, Free State are in the lead, but I need to move with more speed. Looking at bachelor achievements, comparing 2019 with 2020, here again, as Deputy Minister, we're seeing an improvement. The blacks represent the improvements across 3 and 1. 4 provinces have improved in terms of percentages. And if you look at the numbers have certainly improved across most provinces. So here again, another good story to tell. Now here comes the very interesting slide. And if there's nothing else that you recall from my presentation, think about this one. Here what we do is we compare the quintile 1, 2, and 3 schools to the quintile 4 and 5 schools. Now if you look at the table at the bottom, if you look at 2020, we had 115,478 learners coming from quintiles 1, 2, and 3 that attained admission to bachelor studies. This is higher than the 83,463 coming from your quintiles 4 and 5. Now, you may tell me, well, there are more learners coming from quintiles 1 to 3, and therefore the numbers will be higher. But look at the bottom row, where we now look at it in terms of percentages. And percentages, you're comparing apples with apples. And here we have 20% of our quintiles 1, 2, and 3 learners attaining the admission to bachelor studies compared to the 14. Now remember, the 20% that I'm talking about is 20% of the overall. So in terms of percentage, the learners from quintiles 1, 2, and 3 are contributing a greater proportion of admission to bachelor studies than the quintiles 4 and 5. Now let's go quickly to look at the performance of progress learners. And here we did something which just gives us an indication of the impact of progress learners on performance. If progress learners were not included in the class of 2020, the performance would have been 81.2. Now that is a positive, which simply means that the progress learners would have depleted the percentage performance by almost 5%. But what is also interesting is that if you compare it to 2019, in 2019, the pass percentage was 81. And if you remove progress learners in terms of 2019, the difference is just 1%. So it simply means that in the case of 2020, our progress learners, and understandably so because of the larger numbers, have dropped the performance by a larger degree than the 2019 learners. So in the next slide, we just compare the performance of the entire cohort with progress learners excluded. I'm not going to spend time on that, and we can flip through the slide. But the next table, this is important. Maybe we can, 2019, that's fine. In 2019, of the 125,000 progress learners, 84,000 wrote all 6 subjects, 23,000 passed, and we had a 68.1% pass rate. But if you look at the next slide, which is the 2020 scenario, you will find that only 37% of our progress learners passed, simply because we now have 65,000 of them that wrote this examination in terms of, well, not only, but 65,000 of them wrote all 6 subjects. So more of them wrote all 6 subjects. I'm being asked to wrap up, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do that, Deputy Minister, but I'll try my best. And here we look at the performance of progress learners. We can skip through that slide, and we can skip through the next slide as well. Thank you. Now let's go to school performance by quintile. If you look at school performance by quintile, we're now looking at schools in the quintile. And this red is very important, because the red block is telling us that in 2019, 2,484 schools of the 3,495 schools that attained over 80% come from our quintiles 1, 2, and 3 schools. Now that was your situation in 2019. Let's look at 2020, which is the next slide. In the next slide, there's a slight drop, and understandably so, but the drop has not been too great, from 2,400 to 1,736 schools now performing in the 80 to 100%. And let's move on to the next slide, which is your subject performance, and this is very important. Subject performance at the 30%, in terms of percentages, we have dropped. And if you look at the red, that's where we've dropped. But again, business studies, history, and maths literacy have shown an improvement. And here comes the important slide, which is the next slide. But if you look at the higher level of performance, which is at the 40% mark, you find that the number of rates have decreased. So at the 40% level, there's an improvement in performance if one looks at it in terms of percentages. So we can move, and I'm going to flip through the next slide again, next few slides. Home languages, we're doing beautifully well, and in the South, we improved in the case of Afrikaans, not Afrikaans, but English as additional language. So moving on to district performance, this gives us the district performance for 2019, where we have a bulk of our districts performing above 70% or 70% and above. But unfortunately, if one compares it in terms of percentages, that has dropped. And we now have, next slide, we have 19 districts that are performing below 70%. And I'm sure that our district directors, together with our provincial department, will make sure that our districts get back to the 2019 performance. We then very quickly flare the top 10 districts, and it's interesting, Gauteng will be bragging all the way that 6 of the top 10 districts come from Gauteng, 3 from the Free State, and 1 from the Western Cape. And I think we need to change that situation moving into 2021. We can't have Gauteng dominating the table. We also, just for the purpose of information, mentioned the bottom 10 districts, but I think we should not spend too much on that time on that. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, in the next slide, which is also an interesting analysis for your bedtime analysis, we then look at what is the rank order of the provinces and how does that compare, or what is the rank order of the district, and how does that compare when we look at fee-paying and non-fee-paying schools. And I think for me, the concern would be a district like, which one should I pick on? In the case of Metro North, okay? Now, remember, these are your top 10 districts. Now, Metro North, in terms of no fee-paying schools, if you rank it in terms of no fee-paying status, they would have been ranked 21. But yes, they are the top 10 in terms of district performance overall. So these are some of the deeper analysis that we will look at. Moving on to SME learners, we spoke about the SME learners and the number. And in terms of this table, positive performance, 2,058 of them passed, and 943 of them achieved bachelor's, 582 achieved admission to diploma studies. This is indeed startling performance in terms of our learners with special needs. If we go to performance in selected subjects of our part-time candidates, interesting DM that in terms of part-time candidates, there's an improvement in performance. If you compare 2019 and 2020, all across the board, in terms of subject performance, they are improving. And our distinctions are another good story to share. This is giving you a comparison of 2019 versus 2020. And here, not only percentage distinctions that increased for those of you that want to compare apples with apples, but the numbers have also increased from 156,000 distinctions to 177,000 distinctions. And I'm sure, DM, that this will put all our critics to bed for the next few days. Moving on to the next slide, we now compare the distinctions per subject, and here again, we're seeing the shift, except in the red area where we've dropped. Now, this is a very important slide, and even though I may be running out of time, DM, but you'll allow me a few minutes in terms of looking at our progressed candidates and the number of distinctions that they obtained, and we compare 2019 and 2020. Now, just to refresh your memory, your progressed learners, one slide back, let's spend a few seconds on this slide. These are learners that did not make the pass requirements for grade 11, were moved into grade 12, okay? So they are your failures from grade 11. But look at it in terms of math distinctions. We always are driven by mathematics. And 15 of them attain distinction in mathematics, 16 attain distinction in physical science. And if you look at the high numbers in terms of the distinctions in some of the subjects. So for me, the policy on progression is something working if one looks at it in terms of this object. Moving on to performance of social grant learners is the point that I made earlier, which I want to return to, where I spoke about the inactive and the active. Now, in terms of our social grant learners, 65% of them pass, which is again a positive. But if you look at the next slide, where we compare the active versus the inactive, the next slide. Now, here we see the difference between the active recipients versus the inactive. 84% of the active recipients attain the NSC, but 60% of the inactive recipients. So this is something we need to discuss with the Department of Social Development in terms of can we not support these learners, even though they may have turned 18, but the fact that they're still at school, because this could be contributing. I think could, it needs further analysis. But let's move, we then do a comparison of social grant performance in terms of gender, and here there are more that is achieved in terms of girls, but percentages of boys are doing better. But let's move, and the next slide, we compare performance in terms of grant type, and I'm sure you can look at this in your own time. Moving on to correctional services, which is the next slide, of the 153 that entered, 124 roles, and 71 of them passed. And they have a pass rate of 86.3 in prison, doing their best, and like our teachers, they could one day be sitting as judges or magistrates, and that would be an interesting reversal of roles. Correctional services, which is your part-time candidates, 55 entered, 48 roles, and 23 of them passed. I'm moving to the end, DM, but I think this is a slide that I need to spend a few seconds on. Now, comparing the class of 2019 to 2020, I know we're all driven by past statistics, and we are immediately going to say that the class of 2020 dropped in performance. But I want you to consider that statement in the context of this table. Now, look at this table. We compare numbers, and numbers do not lie. If you compare numbers, in terms of number of candidates wrote, we have more candidates writing in 2020. If we look at percentage absent, there was a lower absenteeism in 2020, a positive. If you look at number of passes, there are more passes in 2020. If you look at the number of admission to bachelor studies, there are more admission to bachelor studies in 2020. Number of distinctions, I emphasize this, there's a higher number of distinctions. If you look at subject performance, business studies, economic history, there's an improvement. This is some of the positives that we picked up in terms of this class of 2020. So you would agree with me that this is just not a report on the performance of the class of 2020, but it's a report on resilience, on fortitude, on strength. And in my last few slides, that which drives us is the National Development Plan. But in the context of the National Development Plan, we continuously assess our performance, not just in terms of figures and percentage, but in terms of access, redress, equity, efficiency, and quality. And we've taken each of these 5 key principles and looked at what does the NSC exam tell us about the numbers. And I'm not going to go through each one of them in the interest of time, but in terms of access, we've improved. If you move on to the next slide, in terms of redress, and here we look at non-fee paying schools and how our non-fee paying schools are on an upward trajectory. In terms of equity, we're looking at boys versus girls, and I think throughout the presentation I spoke about the girls doing better. And finally, when we talk about quality is the next slide. We talk about improvements in subject performance. We've seen improvements. We talk about improvements in bachelor's. So, in conclusion, I think what I want to say is that let us indeed applaud the class of 2020. They have definitely persevered and worked beyond the normal demands of a grade 12 year. And they've done us proud. And Deputy Minister, Honorable President, we will continue to analyze these results, and we will take these results to the different levels, right up to the school level, so that our schools, our districts, our circuits get a better understanding of where the areas of weaknesses are, what is it that we have to improve on, so that in 2021 we can present a better report to His Excellency, the President. Thank you very much, Deputy Minister, and sorry for going beyond the time allocation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I am looking at the problem because it has so many items and it takes us up to 4:45. But if we take this, hey, hold the dogs, they'll bite us. Dr. Palio. Can you switch off your mic? Yeah, thank you so much. I was saying we need to try to stick to time. Now, let me allow Umalusi. I'm told Dr. Rakometi is on sick leave, and he will be replaced by Miss Matalane, who is in the meeting. Let's allow Miss Matalane to come in to give us a report on the quality assurance of the DBE NSC November 2020 examination. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, DM. Good morning to the delegates. And I also bring greetings from the CEO. As already announced that the CEO is not well, he is wishing the meeting a success. I want to greet His Excellency the President, who is with us today. Also the Honorable Minister Mayor NG Muteha. DM, I'm also greeting you. And the DG, Mr. Mweli, if he's in the midst of the meeting. And I brought with me 3 colleagues from Umalusi. We've got the Chairperson of Council, Professor Volming. We've got the Acting CEO, Ntate Emmanuel Sibanda, and the Executive Manager, Mezoto Mudimakwani. It was strategic to have them in the meeting that after my presentation, if there are higher grade questions, they will then deal with those. I will only be able to deal with the lower grade questions. Our presentation is as it is outlined there. We're going to be looking at Umalusi mandate and also the overview of quality assurance of assessment and examination, standardization, moderation of school-based assessments, certification, and the approval statement that was issued when Umalusi presented the DBE with the right to can announce the results. Can we then go to slide number 4, which is giving us the mandate of Umalusi? It is always important that we preface our deliberations or our presentations on the legislation that gives Umalusi the right to do whatever we are doing. And our 2 legislations, National Qualification Framework, NQF Act number 67 of 2008, in that section 67, which outlines the functions of Quality Council. The Quality Council must, in order to achieve the objectives of the NQF with regard to quality assurance of its sub-framework, we need to do the following: to develop and implement policy for quality assurance, ensure the integrity and credibility of quality assurance, and ensure that such quality assurance as is necessary for the SIPE framework is undertaken. So in our processes, we make sure that those items that are indicated in the previous slide are always in place. And we also have another legislation that directs our work, which is the Genfector Act, as amended in 2008. And Section 17A states that the Council must perform the external moderation of assessment of all assessment bodies and education institutions. We may adjust raw marks during the standardization process. That one I want to emphasize. We may adjust raw marks during the standardization process. And we must, with the concurrence of the Director General and after consultation with the relevant assessment body or education institution, approve the publication of the results of learners if the Council is satisfied that the assessment body or education institution has satisfied the conditions that warrants such approval, and that's what we have done this year. And I will explain further as I go deeper into the presentation. Next slide. This one is going to look at the processes that we undertook. And in 2020, we moderated 145 question papers for the DBE NSC examinations. And since many of you are aware, this year Business Studies and Accounting had 2 papers, and those question papers are amongst the 145 that we have moderated. And please note, these question papers may have experienced challenges at the beginning, but at the time of writing of examinations, all these question papers were approved. We also did a school-based assessment of 13 selected subjects, and also 5 subjects which have a practical component. Those ones were moderated. We moderated across the PEDs, all the 9 PEDs, and we also included in our sample SBAs of the schools that are in Eswatini, the schools that are registered under the KwaZulu-Natal PED. We audited the DBE, the state of readiness, and in my presentation where I'm going to be speaking to the state of readiness, you should also be aware that this information was prior to the writing of the examinations, but most of those issues that we may have indicated as of concern at that time, they were addressed when the examinations were written. So you have to understand it in context. Then we also did monitoring of the writing of examinations when exams were written. We monitored 466 examination centers and 32 marking centers across the 9 provincial education departments. Can we go to the next slide? Umalusi also attended or participated in the marking guidelines standardization meeting of 65 NSC subjects. I've got it here at subjects, but we attended all the question papers that make up the 65 subjects. We also did a verification of marking of 34 subjects, and we selected different marking centers across the country where we conducted this verification of marking. At the end of the process, the DBE presented 65 subjects for the standardization of the November 2020 NSC examinations, not 2019, my apologies. All irregularities that were identified were managed in accordance with the regulations pertaining to the conduct, administration and management of the National Senior Certificate, and the reports were presented to Umalusi during the approval meeting. And all these were done by the Provincial Examination Irregularities Committees. A detailed report, because in the presentation I'm just going to be having the snippets of what happened, but there will be a detailed report covering the detail of exactly what happened during this process of Umalusi, which then the DBE and the different stakeholders that are interested in our work will see exactly what happened for us to come to the conclusions that we are covering in this presentation. Now I'm going to deal with that, going through the individual processes that we had. Here is a moderation of question papers. Basically, this one speaks to Priscilla Ogubanjo, her team, the internal examiners, the examiners and the internal moderators. These are the things that we have identified when we were moderating the November 2020 question papers. But as I've alluded to earlier, the issues were addressed. When the papers were written, they were now in top form. They were approved by our moderators. I'm not going to go into those details. The team will look at those and also go into the report to find exactly why and how did we come to this. Can we then go to the next slide? For every process, I will also provide you with the directives that we have issued. Remember, when we do our processes, there are places where then we identify non-compliance. In the beginning, I said we develop policy. So all these processes need to be done according to the policies that Umalusi has put in place, and they are shared with the DBE and the assessment bodies. Everyone knows exactly what they have to do. So when we conduct our processes, we do that looking at what policy says. So then if there are deviations from policy, we then come up with directives which are based on the non-compliance that we have identified. In the case of question papers, with the directive, we're saying to the DBE, you need to conduct workshops to train the examining panels on how to set question papers, placing more emphasis on the criteria where most question papers reflected a decline in compliance. And unfortunately, the same criteria that we really concerned about were flagged in the 2019 Umalusi report, but they still came up in the 2020 moderation. So please look at those when you conduct the training. Can we go to the next slide? We conducted SBA moderation like I've alluded to, and here for the SBA moderation as well, there were areas of improvement, but please, you must understand this in context, the number of subjects that we have moderated and the number of sites that we have moderated. This is basically based on the findings of that sample. We have the following areas of improvement were noted: the use of cognitive analysis grid in accounting in the KZN PED. That's an improvement because I highlighted this as a non-compliant in 2019, but in 2020 we found that they have improved based on the advice they received from our report of 2019. The creation of a safe ICT system with secure drive to conduct fair, valid and reliable assessment for the retrospective exhibition and the final NSC practical examination by the Western Cape PED for visual arts. Congratulate them on that one. Improved quality of tests at Philadelphia School of the Deaf as compared to 2019 SASL-HL. I must state up front that we really have a serious concern with SASL, home language, that needs more attention. You will see when you go into the actual report that there are many cases that we have alluded to as far as that is concerned. Directives for compliance for SBA, the DBE must ensure that all PEDs adhere fully to policy regarding the spread of cognitive demand in the administration of either common tasks or their own tasks. The PEDs adhere to policy regarding the implementation of subjects with a practical component, and this is also an area that needs real attention. The next slide. Yes, like I've indicated, we did monitor the state of readiness, actually audit the state of readiness of the PEDs as well as DBE to conduct, administer and manage the 2020 examinations, and these are the items that we have identified as improvements: mitigating strategies employed by the PEDs to address anticipated shortcomings with special reference to COVID-19 pandemic. We know this was a challenge, but I must say we were satisfied in the plans that were shared with us on how the matter was going to be addressed. Improvement of security features at the storage points, a double locking system. Unfortunately, during that time, this indicated that everything was in order. Unfortunately, later, you all know what happened with the leakages of question papers. The PEDs taking cognizance of issues related to the accreditation of private centers and measures put in place to manage the unaccredited centers. This is something that we all have to be happy about, that the PEDs are now understanding the challenges related to candidates writing examinations in centers which are not accredited by Umalusi. We want to avoid the situation where we come to a point that candidates are not certified, because according to our legislation, we cannot certify candidates who write exams in unaccredited centers. We really appreciate the efforts that the PEDs are putting in place to make sure that all the centers where exams are written are accredited centers. Furthermore, the directives for compliance, the DBE and the PEDs are required to ensure that sustainable strategies are in place to address high vacancy rate of examination-related staff across the PEDs, marker shortages in subjects likely to attract high enrollments. And this is the status during the monitoring of the state of readiness, but like I've indicated earlier on, when exams were written, these issues were addressed. But that was on a temporary basis. We need to then put more effort to make sure that we come up with sustainable strategies to deal with the matter. Monitoring the writing. When the exams were written, Umalusi monitored a number of examinations, like I've indicated, examination centers, like I've indicated above, and we noted these two areas of improvement. There was effective implementation of the DBE published health and safety protocol for conduct of examinations, and that was adhered to by the examination centers across the 9 PDs, and the notable monitoring visits during the writing of life orientation kit by the district officials from the sample centers. In 2019, we indicated that during the writing of life orientation, there was some sort of lack of monitoring, but in 2020, we're glad to announce that monitoring was really jacked up in this regard. Directives for compliance and improvement. The DB is required to ensure that systems are in place for monitoring and evaluation of invigilator performance. I'll tell you why we say so. Many irregularities that were reported to us emanate from negligence of invigilators. Hence, we feel that it is important that the PEDs as well as the DBE come up with measures of monitoring these invigilators and also evaluating their performance and taking actions to those invigilators that indicated negligence in the work that they're doing, because this really may at a certain point may turn the examination to not to be credible due to the number of irregularities that we experience. Can we go to the next slide? Before marking happens, we then go to the different PEDs to audit the appointed markers. We audit the lists. We check whether the people that the PEDs have put on their list as markers are the people that are appointed according to the policy for the appointment of markers, and PAM making the basic document that we use in this regard. Then areas of improvement that we have noted in the Eastern Cape, foreign qualifications of the appointed marking personnel were endorsed by SAQA and or the Eastern Cape Department of Education. So it was really a commendable measure for us to find that the PED took action or responsibility to make sure that anyone who's carrying a foreign qualification, their qualifications are endorsed by SAQA and the Eastern Cape Department. Submission of Annexure C, declaration of marking personnel by the Western Cape PD, indicated if the appointed marking personnel had a children relative in grade 12 or not. And provision of a contingency plan regarding the appointment of markers by the Western Cape PED. Those are the areas of improvement that we noted, but in the same breath, there were issues that were non-compliant to policy, and we issued directives for that. In this case, we require the DBE to ensure that PEDs submit the necessary information, data, and provide access to online administration system for auditing purposes. We're saying this because when we come up with our non-compliance statements and our directives, we may, because we did not have access to all the information from the PEDs, we may then be regarded as having ignored certain things and put a finger on issues that are negative, whereas in actual fact, if the information was provided to us, we could have identified or been able to confirm that the markers that were appointed were really appointed according to policy. The PEDs should verify the information regarding teaching experience versus marking experience provided by the applicants, and evidence be made available for audit purposes as well. Next slide. We also, like I've indicated earlier, we attended the marking guideline discussions, and the role of Umalusi here is to be part of this. Remember, when a marking guideline is developed with a question paper, those are not field tested. And when the candidates do write the examinations, you may find that there were certain items that were not taken into consideration when the marking guideline was developed. Now, during these meetings, discussions take place where then questions that were found when marking of a certain sample of scripts is done prior to the actual marking, items come up. And Umalusi needs to be there because we are actually the approver of the marking guideline that needs to be used at the marking centers. Hence, we attend such meetings. And At the meetings, the areas of improvement that we noted, the DBE was able to mitigate COVID-19 challenges through virtual meetings to augment face-to-face meetings, and there was a significant increase in the level of compliance with the 20 scripts pre-marking requirement in 2020 as compared to 2019. We guess the 20 scripts, it's a sample enough to can indicate whether the marking guideline is in line with how the candidates have responded. But all the same, we issued directives in this regard. The DBE must ensure that the PEDs comply with the 20 scripts pre-marking requirements stipulated in DBE Circular E13 of 2020, and then it means in 2021, the circular that will be issued, the PEDs must comply with that one. Improve on the logistical arrangement in respect of setup of virtual meetings and PEDs access to training scripts. Yes, we do understand that we are in a new normal. The platforms that we get into are not known, or maybe we are not really familiar with. There are challenges here and there, but it is important that we try and minimize the glitches that come with online platforms. Monitoring of marking. When marking was conducted, we also went out to monitor marking. Like I've indicated, we went to a number of marking centers throughout the country, and the following were noted. The role the DBE played in ensuring acceptable levels of readiness in preparing for the quality assurance of marking processes across the PEDs is really commendable. All PEDs managed marking processes that were free from disruptions, and all PEDs ensured that there were implementable strategies in place to mitigate any possible risks relating to marking. Of note was the strategies each PED developed to mitigate possible marker shortages, which Umalusi verified during the monitoring at sampled marking centers. And remarkable levels of compliance with the DBE health and safety protocols for managing the marking center under COVID-19 conditions were evidenced across monitored marking centers, and that is also appreciated. And the next slide, directives that go with the monitoring of the marking centers. The DBE must ensure that all centers are audited before they can be allocated marking center status. We say so that because at certain marking centers, the places were really not conducive to be having been allotted this status, and the markers were put into a situation which was really not comfortable. We request that before marking centers are declared marking centers, a thorough monitoring and audit of those places must happen. Each PED provides center managers with audited lists of appointed markers for verification purposes. Remember, when we do marker audit, we confirm the lists that the provinces have put in place, but when we do monitoring of marking centers, we have then to confirm that those lists that we have confirmed during the marker audit process are the same lists, and the same markers are now at the venue. So it is important that the marking center managers have those lists to them for us to be able to can confirm that. Similar security arrangements and responsibilities are issued to all security companies, and necessary marking related documentation, including marking management plans and right of occupation documents, be available and accessible for monitors to verify. That I can't stress any further. Next slide. Then when marking is happening, we also conduct verification of marking. And the following areas of improvement regarding the process of verification of marking were noted. The seating arrangements in adherence to social distance protocols made it easy for marking personnel to maintain a high level of concentration during the marking process. There was less evidence of shadow marking reported from the marking centers. In the Western Cape, daily constructive feedback sessions were implemented for Afrikaans home language by the internal moderator and chief marker to ensure consistent and focused marking procedures. The marking process for SASL Paper 1, Paper 2, and Paper 3 was executed much smoother this year Two aspects that contributed to this were that only grade 12 SASL home language teachers marked the literature, and deaf teaching assistant assisted with dialect variations during the marking process. Can we go to slide 22? Areas of improvement continued here. We've got the quality of the internal moderation that has improved in KwaZulu-Natal for physical sciences, paper 2. The marking of creative answers for music, paper 1, indicated a marked improvement from previous years because of the appointment of more experienced marking personnel and excellent on-site training. Placement of the examination assistants in the marking venue for mechanical technology, automotive fitting, welding was a definite improvement regarding the addition of marks and scripts. Marking errors identified by Maths Lit Paper 1 and Paper 2 in the Western Cape were communicated to the markers to avoid recurrence of similar errors. This type of moderation was both informative and developmental to all the marking personnel. Slide 23. However, we still have issued directives as far as verification of marking is concerned because we found some few non-compliant areas. PEDs keep a sufficient pool of markers in case of withdrawal or shortage due to unforeseen circumstances. Appointment letters are issued and distributed to all marking personnel prior to the commencement of marking. Additional personnel are appointed for administration duties and the welfare of markers. This will release the chief markers and internal moderators from these duties to concentrate and add value to the marking and moderation processes. Marking personnel with requisite subject contact knowledge and teaching experience at grade 12 level are appointed. In English first additional language, such markers must be conversant with the different genres applicable to paper 2. The report will indicate where these were identified in which PEDs. DBE must ensure that whole script moderation of 10% of all scripts is completed by deputy chief markers. Chief markers and internal moderators. Appropriate qualified markers for mechanical technology, automotive and fitting and welding are appointed to mark in line with their area of specialization. And COVID-19 protocols are adhered to at all marking centers. Then we go to the standardization, which is something that is of concern to people maybe who don't understand this process. Standardization in terms of Section 17A(4) of the Gen Factor Act number 58 of 2001, Council may adjust raw marks. That's a part that is quoted in our legislation, and Council is given the right to do that. Therefore, standardization of a national result is Umalusi's legislative mandate. And that is according to our Gen Factor Act, where I've indicated earlier that we can only approve the results if they were conducted in a credible manner. And the standardization process is one of the processes that we make sure that the examinations were credible can be allowed to be released. Umalusi standardizes the results of all qualifications on our sub-framework. It doesn't only happen for NSC. Then this slide tries to explain what standardization is. It is a moderation process used all over the world to mitigate the impact of learner performance caused by exam-related factors other than learner subject knowledge, abilities, and aptitude. We all know that when you write examinations, there are other factors besides the fact that how well were you prepared for the exam. The standardization of examination results is necessary to take care of any variation in the standard of the question papers, which may occur despite careful moderation processes, as well as variations in the standardization of marking that may occur from year to year. Other sources of variability include undetected errors and learners' interpretation of questions. Standardization is that necessary to achieve comparability and consistency of examination standards across the years. I've indicated that at marking guideline, some of the issues that were not identified during the development of the question paper and the marking guideline are identified. But that is not all that may have happened. There are other things that can be detected later, and those then will need to be addressed through standardization. The standardization process happens to ensure that a cohort of learners is not advantaged or disadvantaged by extraneous factors other than their knowledge of the subject, abilities, and their aptitude, to achieve comparability and consistency from one year to the next. Next slide. Now this slide gives the principles of how then the Assessment Standards Committee conduct the standardization process. Generally, no adjustment should exceed 10% of the historical average in either direction, either upwards or downwards. If the distribution of the raw marks is below or above the historical average, the marks may be adjusted either way, subject to limitations. In the case of an individual candidate, the adjustment effected should not exceed half of the raw mark obtained by the candidate. After considering qualitative and quantitative reports, the ASC formulate positions on each subject, accept raw mark, go up or go down. And like I've indicated, it's standardization. Even if they retain the raw mark, a discussion about that particular subject would have taken place and agreed on a raw mark. Now, here are a number of observations that were made during the standardization of the 2020 NSC examinations. The South African Sign Language Home Language capacity building and support for teachers is needed. Technical mathematics performance was extremely poor. The subject was the hardest compared to the other technology and technical subjects. Accommodations and concessions. It is of concern that the accommodation and concessions are very low compared to other assessment bodies. Here, the DBE really has to make effort to advise and guide the candidates who qualify to get accommodation and concessions when writing the examinations. The next slide. Can we move to, thank you. Here are the decisions that were made. They were already made public knowledge, but you can compare from 2016 to 2020, number of instructional offerings that were presented to Umalusi for standardization. This year, 2020, there were 65. Raw marks in 2020, those that are kept at raw mark, it's 48. Which is 74% of the subjects that were submitted for standardization as compared to the previous years. Adjusted upwards for 2020, 9 were adjusted up, and for the ones adjusted down for 2020, 8 were adjusted down as compared to the numbers that we have for the other years. Next slide. That is school-based assessment. Now, school-based assessment, we all know it forms 50% of the mark that the candidates have to get for the final examinations. Now, the information that I'm presenting here, it's speaking to the statistical moderation of the SBA. Remember earlier on I spoke on moderation of the SBA of a sample. That is not the one that has affected this statistical moderation. All the marks that were submitted to Umalusi had to go through a statistical moderation of those marks, and there are processes that are followed, principles that are followed as highlighted in this slide. SBA averages means that are between 5 to 10% above the adjusted examination mark. Average are accepted as is. But in the case where 5% is above the adjusted examination mean, average are brought up to 5% above the adjusted examination mean. More than 15% above the adjusted examination mean, 5%, they are brought down to 5% above the adjusted mean. The raw marks I'm talking about are those examination raw marks. So they're comparing the SBA marks as well to against the examination mark to do these adjustments. between 11% and 15% above the adjusted mean of the examination mark are scaled down as follows. 11% scaled down to 9%, and there it means a loss of 2%. 12% scaled down to 8%, a loss of 4%. 13% scaled down to 7%, a loss of 6%. 14 scaled down to 5, a loss of 9, and 15% scaled down to 5, which is a loss of 10%, and that is very huge. Meaning if the marks are inflated to 15%, they will be scaled down to 5, and the candidates will then be at a loss of 10% of their SBA mark. Now this slide shows how the gateway subjects SBAs were rejected this year. In 2020, and you can also see the other years prior to 2020, what happened to that particular subject. In accounting, in 2020, 88 centers SBAs were rejected. Business studies, 14. Economics, 27. English file, 29. English home, 8. Geography, 108. History, 28. Life sciences, 13. Mathematical literacy, 74. Mathematics, 46. Physical sciences, 57. Then the next slide. The next slide shows us where those adjustments happened per PED. And the PEDs highlighted in red for those subjects are the ones that contributed more to the number of centers that whose SBAs were rejected. I'm not going to go into that, but this is just a distribution of the centers that we had in the previous slide. Next slide, 36. New subjects with the rejected SBA. Here we also show the new subjects that were implemented 2018, 2019, 2020. That also shows how they were affected. Next slide. Issues that can contribute to inflated SBA marks. Standard and quality of school-based assessment. If a school sets its own school-based assessments and you find that they are really on a weaker side, candidates perform well in those, but when the mark comes in, it's not comparable to the exam mark. Then we'll find those issues where we then think the marks are inflated. Quality of marking and application of rubrics, inability to distinguish between satisfactory, good and excellent learner responses, shadow marking instead of actual moderation, and ineffective internal moderation system. Next slide. That is all about SBA. Can we go to certification, where certification of the results? This, in this case, will be what should happen for candidates to be certified after the examination. Certification marks the end of a quality assurance process. When a certificate is issued to a learner, the requirement is that certification must be done within 3 months after the release of the results. You can see it's highlighted, and that's a serious call to the PEDs that please let's make sure that all the candidates who wrote the previous exam are they're certificated within 3 months after the release of results at the worst. Important aspects regarding certification: all learners that were resulted for the November 2020 examination must be certified. Number of resulted learners equals to number of certifications. Within 3 months after resulting, but the sooner the better to prevent the backlog of certificates. The colleagues who work in this section, they know what happens when a candidate is not certified. It's an unpleasant situation. Candidates cannot move forward in life if they don't have certificates. So please let's address this matter as a matter of urgency. Umalusi is required by law to submit certified data to NLRD 30 days after completion of the quality assurance process. So if you delay applications for certification, you also disadvantage Umalusi in its work. And after all the processes have happened up till at the approval, because at the end of all these processes, the DBE comes to Umalusi, present their reports on how they have conducted the process, and the Executive Committee of Council, as mandated by Council, will sit down and look at those reports, as well as the reports that are presented by the internal Umalusi staff, on the processes we undertook in this regard, and they will deliberate and come up with a final decision on the examinations that were conducted, and we normally term that approval period, and they come up with an approval statement. Here I'm going to share with you the approval statement which granted the Minister of the DBE to then release the results of the 2020 NSC examinations. The approval statement reads as follows. Having studied all the evidence presented, the Executive Committee EXCO of Umalusi Council noted the isolated irregularities reported during the writing and marking of the examinations, as well as the group copying cases reported in 4 provinces involving 893 candidates. In addition, Umalusi has noted with concern the serious irregularities regarding the leakage of mathematics paper 2 and physical sciences paper 2 question papers. However, EXCO is satisfied that there were no systemic irregularities reported which might have compromised the overall credibility and integrity of the November 2020 National Senior Certificate NSC examinations administered by the Department of Basic Education. Next slide. The approval statement continues. The Executive Committee of Council approves the release of the DBE results of the November 2020 NSC examinations based on available evidence that the examinations were administered in accordance with the examination policies and regulations. In respect of the general identified irregularities, the DBE is required to block the results of candidates implicated in irregularities, including the candidates involved in group copying, pending the outcome of further DBE investigations and Umalusi verification, and tighten the security at all levels to ensure that there are no leakages of question papers. And in light of the unprecedented circumstances pertaining to the leakages of the mathematics paper 2 and physical sciences paper 2 question papers, EXCO resolves as follows. Where there has been unauthorized access to question papers and where there is evidence beyond being a passive recipient of the papers, the results of the implicated candidates should be blocked pending further investigation. In all other cases, the results should be released. Next slide. The DBE is required to address the directives of compliance and improvement highlighted in the Quality Assurance of Assessment report and submit an improvement plan by the 26th March 2021. The Executive Committee of Council commends the DBE for conducting a successful and credible examination despite challenges presented by COVID-19 and the leakage of question papers through social media. And that brings us to the end of the Umalusi presentation on the conduct of the quality assurance of the conduct of the 2020 NSC examinations. And I thank you, DM, for the opportunity.
Thank you so much for the presentation of Umalusi. Mayor Louise, thank you so much. By now, we're supposed to be taking questions, comments, and discussions, but I want to allow the minister, because minister is now in the meeting, to just greet the meeting and give her overview before we break for lunch. It's an early lunch. Minister, over to you.
Okay. No, thank you very much, DM. And let me sincerely apologize to the meeting for the earlier glitches that I had with the ICT. The problem was that I had entered as a participant not as an attendee, not as a participant. As a result, the system will not allow me to speak. But fortunately, I was able to follow all the discussions, and I promise you, I'll just take 5 minutes because most of the issues that I would have raised would have been raised. But I thought it was very important for me to acknowledge you, DM, and thank you very much for starting the meeting, to thank all my colleagues from provinces, the MECs, to thank the chairperson of both the Select Committee in Parliament and the Portfolio Committee, to thank our partners from Umalusi, SACE, ELRC, and the different NGOs that we work with, NECT, and all other NGOs. But also most important, to thank our teacher unions, our school governing bodies, our principals, who really on an ongoing basis guide and support the work that we do. Civil society organizations, which have been really great in 2020 in really making sure that as a department we proceed well. I'm aware that we have esteemed international guests that we have invited and want to thank them really for participating. This year in particular, we had lots of support from academics, from researchers, and leaders from higher education and just the education sector, and I really want to thank them and acknowledge them. DG and all the officials in the sector, I want to thank you. Our donors and our partners who have been at all times very supportive in the moments of need. Our teachers who really are the anchor, I want to greet you and thank you very much. DM, I think you'll note that this is our 5th year that we've been having these quotas. And for us as a department, as a sector, are very important because they help us in inculcating a culture of collective reasoning, critical inquiry, and public sector-wide planning. So it really strengthens us to know that that which we are doing, we've had an opportunity to get more counsel, advice, and guidance from a broad range of people in the community. So they're very key and very important to us. And these Makotlas help us to interact with our stakeholders and share sector priorities with them. It might sound too long. I was happy that we gave them the whole report of Umalusi, a whole report of exams. So this Lekgotla helps us in that sense, that it helps us to share with our stakeholders and fine-tune our plans with their guidance. And again, I'm very grateful that it also gives us a chance to have an honest reflection on our missteps, on our successes, and enable us to see blind spots where perhaps as a sector we're missed looking at something. I won't speak about the 2020 results, but I really want to emphasize the point that we're grateful as a country that in the midst of all the difficulties, we have been able to get our children to sit for a credible exam, as Umalusi has just reflected, and for that we are very humbled and very grateful. The point I just want to make around exams, DM, is to encourage our stakeholders and our parents and the public in general to encourage those that have failed, those who really got results which are not very satisfactory, to use the second chance program which we have as a department. We'll be working very hard to strengthen it further to make sure that they get all the adequate support that they need as young people. So we had extended the date for the second chance or for the June exams. They'll be closing in March. They were supposed to have closed now in February. So we want to encourage them to take advantage of the June exams, but some should really prepare themselves for a rewrite in December so they don't rush for June and still find that they are not prepared. The ultimate aim really of this Lekgotla is to help us reflect on our mandates and priorities as a sector, to chart the way forward, and to make sure that as a country, we always feel quite sad when we go to tests and find that our dream as proud South Africans of reaching high quality basic education is not there. And it's a dream that we cherish and has been also been cherished by our forebears. So it's for us as South Africans to hold hands and say, how do we move forward? I do want to assure South Africans that we are as prepared as could have been. Obviously, the system will not be perfect. It's a big difficult system, and that's why we always value and appreciate more hands to come forward to assist us to get things right. We have obviously been affected by the pandemic. It has delayed some of our programs which were supposed to have been launched late last year. Some, like infrastructure, have been delayed because we had to close the building industry for a long time. But on the other hand, strange enough, it has had positive results where we had to really take forward some of our projects, like your water sanitations programs or plans that we have had for 2023 had to be pushed forward to make sure that we can meet the demands that came with COVID-19. We are all, I could have struggling the morning to connect, but we are all becoming really smarter and cleverer in terms of ICTs, and we're doing everything in our powers to make sure that we can bring the ICTs. So, Chair, I don't want to take your time. I want to say to the village that is here, which is all the adults, the Committee of South Africa, that please, let's do it again in 2021. We rely on your support. We rely on your guidance. We rely on your continued counsel, and want to say at DM, we value and appreciate the partnerships of all the stakeholders that work with us from the different areas, and say we value and highly appreciate and want to thank them for having participated or having joined us. And again, apologized here most profusely that in the morning I was joined wrongly, that I was joined as a, or I had registered myself as an attendee, not as a participant. That's why I was not able to speak, but that has been corrected. And thank you very much, DM. And thank all the participants for joining us, and say we're looking forward to a very productive and fruitful engagement. Thank you, DM.
Thank you so much, Minister. Thank you. And we understand this platform, but we'll improve day by day because it looks like it will be the way to go. Minister, this is a time for questions, comments, and discussions.
Okay. Hello?
Yes, I know that that was supposed to take 10 minutes. I don't know how possible. And the lunch, which I said I'm complaining about because we started at 9, the lunch is at 11 until 11:30, and now according to my watch is 11:14. Is there anyone who was trying to say something? But I'm expecting hands for comments on the 2 presentations, the speak.
DM, you won't see hands. We have posted questions in the chat, and we encourage all of the participants to please use the Q&A function to ask questions. You can look at the Q&A and pick up the questions from there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still looking the Q&A. DM's camera is on, but my camera is not on. Unless there's another platform for Q&A. This one is for chatting. If there's no question or comments, can I then?
DM, just quickly to assist, the Q&A is under the text box with a question mark in. If you click on there, you will be able to see the questions, but there were no real questions posed, just a comment from Anonymous that it was a very interesting presentation and that they found it a bit misleading to compare bachelor passes and diploma, etc. of quintile 1 to 3 and 4 to 5 schools. The number and circumstances are different. It would have been better to uniquely look at the data rather than a comparison or by saying how many bachelors were in quintile 1, 2 and 3, etc. Another area was, let me just go there. There was a question about shadow marking. What is shadow marking? I have responded to that in the Q&A as well. And then there was another input saying nowhere in the mandate, in terms of the GenFECVA Act, does it specify that Umalusi must only accredit or only quality assure the entities that offer the CAPS curriculum. The mandate talks about quality assurance and accreditation of general further education and training in South Africa. That means any legal educational institution offering general and further education and training programs that leads to an exit qualification in South Africa should be catered for by the Umalusi Council. Umalusi has narrowly interpreted its mandate to mean quality assurance and accreditation of those entities offering the CAPS and NSC. That cannot be correct, as it disadvantages those schools and learners offering alternative curriculum, i.e. the accelerated Christian education, Montessori curriculum and Waldorf. We need to provide parents and learners with a variety of curriculum choices and exit qualification that leads to tertiary education and employment. And further, Umalusi needs to review its policy position on not accrediting schools that do not follow the CAPS curriculum. This is a serious case of administrative injustice and misinterpretation of the law. Thousands of learners of the schools have been denied the right to pursue education that is found on the values and ethos of the choice. In short, that was an input. I just want to see, and yeah, also I cannot see who that response was for, DM. Those were the issues that were raised under the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. MEC colleagues, when you want to raise, if your writing might be taking some time, you just indicate with your voice, you unmute and indicate that you want to come in. But let us quickly take this lunch break. I don't know, because we're at home. Now it's about 20 past. Let's come back at
Your call has been put on hold. Please wait.
That's not my call. I think it's Mr. Fesachis.
Your call has been placed on hold. Please wait.
This break will
Your
come
call
back
has
at
been placed on
12. Thank you.